Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my predictions for the May Melee bracket. This is the regional bracket with all of the other the APAC teams and the North American teams playing against each other. So I wanted to go through, give my thoughts on the bracket, where things are, and how I think teams will perform. So yeah, here we go. We're gonna go through it and we're gonna talk about it as I go along. So we have two matches in the first round. Shanghai Dragons against the Florida Mayhem. Shanghai Dragons, the lower-seeded team from the APAC region versus the higher-seeded team from the North American region, the Florida Mayhem. And then the Dallas Fuel, the lower-seeded NA team, against the Chengdu Hunters, the higher-seeded APAC team. So start with the Shanghai Dragons and the Florida Mayhem. This one to me is very interesting. We have Fate up against his former team. Fate, of course, on the Shanghai Dragons. Formerly on the Florida Mayhem. This to me is a really interesting matchup. I think the Dragons should be the favorite in terms of on paper roster, right? They have arguably the better, well-rounded roster, better DPS, the reigning MVP, the better tank line potentially, and a really, really, really solid support line, probably the edge there. But I think the Florida have actually looked a lot better, and I thought this past weekend on Sunday they looked very, very strong and they looked very, very coordinated. It was the best OG we've ever seen in the Overwatch League. So to me, this is a really interesting series because I think that we have a really good support line in the Mayhem with Slime Gangnam Jin. I don't think that OG and Gargoyle are quite at the level of Fate Void as a whole. I think Void is just really, really good, and I think that he is the better off-tank there. I think that's one of the things that the Florida Mayhem are going to have to kind of win is that off-tank matchup. DPS where it gets really interesting because the Shanghai Dragons have not seemed to get as much value out of their third DPS player whenever they bring in DM. And they seem to really only get most of their value when they have Fleta and Lip playing. Whereas the Mayhem have done really, really well with just running BKB and Yaki and this, or Yaki. And this meta has really, really favored them. So this is a really tough one. But something that has been kind of talked about was basically that kind of how do these teams react to adversity? And I think that this is going to be an interesting series and it's going to be somewhat close. But to me, you have to give the edge to Shanghai. And I think it's actually not going to be a super close series. I'm actually going to say it's probably a 3-1. Florida has the ability, of course, to pick maps. They'll have the first map pick, and they'll have any losses that they have later on. But I think that Shanghai have just they've proven themselves at a high level multiple times. They've looked really good throughout their time in the Overwatch League with this kind of current roster, and so to me, this is a team that should be favored to win this matchup. I know that this may be a hot take to some people, but I think that you give Shanghai time, they're only going to get better. I think they're a team that will just keep improving over time. They made this tournament as underdogs in a lot of people's minds, so I think that they really have just room to just continue growing and getting better. I think that's what we're going to see here. The interesting matchup, to me, the more interesting matchup, the one I think is a lot harder to predict, is the Dallas Fuel against the Chengdu Hunters, because the Dallas Fuel looked very good. They don't really run the meta, though. The Chengdu Hunters, for so long, never ran the meta, but finally they kind of can run the meta, and they've started to look very good running the meta as they choose to. So this one's difficult for me, but I really like the Dallas Fuel for two reasons. Number one is Fearless. Fearless has been incredible, and he has been one of the best players in the Overwatch League all season. His Winston has been really good. His Reinhardt's been really good. His Orisa is not all that great. But because Orisa isn't really being played, and you don't have to really get away with playing Orisa, Fearless is able to really excel. And the second thing that I think has been really, really good is Fielder. Fielder has looked incredible. And he and Jexe together have really enabled Fearless to do anything he wants. I don't know if Chengdu will have that same success they found against some other teams as they will against the Fuel. We saw Chengdu get exploited by the Fusion. And I think that the Fuel can bring a very similar style to that. And so I think this one will be pretty close. I think Chengdu is too talented, and they've looked really good in some of their DPS decisions. I think that, Jimmy's looked really good this season. Leaves looked really good. And then their tank line has looked really good. And I think that Monk and Nisha have had a very good year as well. But I'm going to give the edge to the Fuel in this one. 3-2. I think it's a close series, this one. But I like what the Fuel have done. I think that the talent we've seen from them with Fearless, how good Fearless has looked, I think is really, really strong. And so I give the edge to this one, to the Dallas Fuel. The next game will be this winners finals against Shanghai and Dallas. That is the order of the schedule, as you can see. So that's the one I'll talk about next. And this, to me, is a very interesting one because I think that you have a team in Shanghai that looks like they're just getting better over time, and they're a very organized team. You have Dallas, who just have kind of had to run what they want to run without being able to run meta compositions because they don't have the hit scan player, right? So in theory, the Shanghai Dragons have that benefit of having some really strong hit scan players in Lip and in DM, and even Fleta can run it if need be. So there is something to be said about that for this team. But the thing that I think you really will see that will be the big difference in the Dallas Fuel's series in this tournament is their aggression. They play a very aggressive style. If you watched their series against the Houston Outlaws, one of the things that they really, really pushed was just unchecked aggression. The Houston Outlaws just were always on their back foot. They couldn't really make moves. They couldn't really do anything because they were just constantly getting pressured and pressured and pressured and pressured by the Dallas Fuel, especially by Fearless and by Sparkle's Tracer and by Hanbin. And so that is the thing that Dallas Fuel were doing very, very well. I don't think they'll find as much success with that against Shanghai because Shanghai is a much more well-coordinated team. They're a much more, balanced team. They know how to play very aggressively. They also know how to kind of pull back and play somewhat defensively and protect themselves when the time is right. So for me, at least, I think this is a very tough series to call because Shanghai have looked good, but they haven't looked very flashy, and that's been kind of my big criticism for this Shanghai Dragons team is they've just looked solid, but they've looked at a lot of the time that they're just kind of treading water, right? They're doing what they need to do to find success and to find victories, but they're not doing the most like flashy types of dominating performances that we saw last season. Now it's early in the season, that can change, but they've been a little bit more challenged. So I'm curious to see what Dallas is able to do. But Shanghai gives me more confidence because they have been in these types of positions before. They won the May Melee and APAC last season. They won the Countdown Cup last season. They were one of the top 4 teams in the Grand Finals last season. Yes, they didn't make it all the way, but they've been there, and they've had that challenge before. And so to me, I look at where this Shanghai Dragons team is at currently, and I think there is a very real possibility that this team has a realistic shot at winning this tournament. And so for me, I give the Shanghai Dragons the edge in this one. Once again, I'm going to say it is a 3-2, but I think the Shanghai Dragons should be favored in this one because I think they have a much stronger play style. And I think that they are going to spend a lot of time improving and getting better. Another thing to note, which I think is very important as well, is the Dallas Fuel, what they did over the past week, you're going to be able to watch that and watch that back and be able to counter plan for it and counter strat for it. So it's not going to be as dangerous, in my opinion. And I don't think the Fuel will be able to bring that same kind of surprise element as they were able to going into the tournament. Moving back down to the losers bracket. Florida Mayhem against the Chengdu Hunters. I'm not the biggest believer in this Florida Mayhem roster. I think Chengdu has proven themselves more. They beat Shanghai, they beat Seoul. Florida's wins I thought were okay. I mean, they beat Toronto, who I didn't think was that good to begin with, and they beat a Washington Justice team that is still, I think, finding their footing. The Florida Mayhem are a little bit more established. Yes, they have a new main support, but this is a main support who's been on the biggest stages in the Overwatch world. He's not really worried about this type of stuff. And yeah, they have OG. He's not a rookie, though, and when he's the one player you kind of have to integrate in a way that has not been in the stage before, he's done a pretty good job with it. I think Kuki's a great head coach. So the Mayhem do have that, but they have not really been on these big stages. Now, neither has Chengdu. But the difference is Chengdu is a team that doesn't really seem to crumble in the same way, right? Chengdu just plays the game, and they never really seem to, like, get really overcome by pressure. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is just because I'm not as connected to that Chinese scene, and I'm not as connected to the Chinese players, and I don't really know what they go through a lot of the time, because social media is very different for Chinese players, and so everything is very much through translators and through people who I don't always get to kind of have that exposure to. So Chengdu to me seems like a team that is always kind of keeping their composure, doesn't really make a lot of, like, mistakes in that way. They may make mistakes in terms of how they play, but it's never usually like they fall apart, they crumble under pressure type of team. The Mayhem, I think, do, and the Mayhem are a team that I think, while they are good, and while they did a very good job getting this far in the tournament, I think that they are going to be met with challenges they are not even prepared for. And I do not think that they are going to have a very good, fun road. I think Chengdu win this one. I will once again give the Mayhem a map, but I really have very, very, very little confidence in the Mayhem to make a really deep run on this, because I think that the opposition is really, really strong. And as good as Florida's been, I think OG has looked incredible recently. I just have to give it the direction of the Chengdu Hunters for this one, because I just think that they've looked stronger. Now we get a rematch, Chengdu versus Dallas Fuel. So do I think anything changes in this second match that these two teams play? The reality is, you're going to have, no matter what, if these two teams play again, or any two teams play again, you're going to see things look kind of better, right? And one of the things I noticed is, in the playoff last season, when we saw rematches, typically, it actually went better for the team that lost the first time around. Now, they didn't win. Seoul Dynasty didn't beat the Shanghai Dragons the second time they played them, or the San Francisco Shock the second time they played them. But it was a closer series the second time they played them than it was the first time they played. And so for me, I look at where Chengdu is, and I say, okay, you played Dallas, you were hit by Dallas's kind of aggression and their play style, but now you've had a day to think about it and look back on it and kind of reflect on what you did. And I think that in that situation, I think Chengdu should be favored, because I do think they have shown themselves to be a stronger team overall. Dallas has had their ups and their downs. Yeah, they lost to good teams, right? They lost to the Justice and they lost to the Shock. Was it the Shock? The Outlaws, sorry. They lost to the Justice and the Outlaws. They lost to good teams. And so it's kind of this question of where is Dallas? And I think Chengdu should be more favored in a rematch. But I really think that Dallas has just advantages in every position. And the thing that I think is, the thing that benefits Chengdu is that they like that Pharah composition, right? They love putting Jinmu on Pharah. Dallas is going to struggle to have a lot of things to deal with that. They kind of have to run Diva to deal with it. They won't have a good hit scan. They won't have a dedicated hit scan player at all for this series. So I think Chengdu should be favored in this second matchup, and I'm going to pick them to win. I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup. I think it's a 3-2. I think it's a close series again, but it's really tough for me to really kind of pick this bracket. It's very, very interesting for me. So those are the teams I like. I'm actually kind of surprised. But to me, Dallas got in on very, very strong play and very strong performances, but I don't know if they're going to be able to make it all the way, because I think that now that there's time to read these teams and figure them out a little bit more, I think we'll see the likes of Florida and Dallas get more checked, because they don't have that same kind of experience playing on this high level and the same kind of cohesion that some of these other teams have. And so to me, that one goes the way of the Chengdu Hunters in their second matchup. And then you get to the final grand finals, a rematch of a series that has already been pretty interesting to see this season. The Shanghai Dragons getting 3-0'd last time they played Chengdu. What happens the second time they play, right? Maybe I have just been poisoned and corrupted by the past, but I am always somebody who's very big on the idea that you cannot get too caught up in the past, and you can't get too caught up in the present. You have to take things as they are, and you have to think things through logically, right? And especially you can't get caught up in the present more than anything else, right? Yes, the Shanghai Dragons lost to the Chengdu Hunters. They did it last season too, right? There's precedence for that. But the Shanghai Dragons haven't lost a match since then. Yeah, they had a close series against the Hangzhou Spark, and yeah, they had a close series against the Fusion. This is a Fusion team that dominated the Chengdu Hunters when they played them. And that's a Chengdu Hunters team that had dominated Shanghai when they played. So there's kind of this triangle, right? Shanghai beat Philly. Philly beat Chengdu. Chengdu beat Shanghai. So one of these three teams is the best teams in APAC. I think Shanghai should be favored in the second matchup between Chengdu and Shanghai, because I think Shanghai have looked like they have managed to get things together. I thought it would take them a little bit of time to get together. I thought they would actually perform better early on than they have, but I still think the Shanghai Dragons should be the favorite team in this entire tournament. I know a lot of people are not picking them. I know a lot of people have Shanghai as kind of the weakest team in this tournament. And I think that people who do that have not been watching and are not... They're getting too caught up in what's happening right now, which is something you can't always feed into, right? Some teams that are really good don't put their all into every single like day-to-day, week-to-week match, because they just say we need to focus more on just kind of general things, working things out generally, so that come tournament time, we're ready, we're going, and we're good. So I think Shanghai's winning the May Melee. I think they're going to win. I think it'll be a 4-2 victory over the Chengdu Hunters. I think it's a close series. I really do, but I have so much confidence in Shanghai based on what we saw from them over the past year. I still think that the way that they beat Philadelphia, I think Philadelphia lost that series in a lot of cases, and I think Shanghai just kind of took every opportunity they had at the end of that series and took it. I have concerns about them, but I think you give them time. You give them the possibility to be in a double elimination bracket, and I think they get everything together anyway, and I think that they figure it out. So I'm picking Shanghai. I think Shanghai's going to win. I'm predicting that Shanghai Chengdu finals. You can kind of see my whole bracket right there. So that's where I'm at with that. I'd love to hear from you all in the comments down below. Your thoughts, your own predictions, who you have winning this whole thing. I think a lot of people have Dallas, and I think it's understandable. I think Dallas have looked really good. The way that they played this past weekend was really, really good. But I get concerned by teams that have like that really kind of quick spark of brilliance and have that 1-2 matches in a row in the same weekend where they look really, really good, and then they have a long break before they play again. It's going to have been about less than a week. It'll be like 4 days, but that's enough time, especially when you don't have to travel, right? Chengdu don't have to travel. Shanghai don't have to travel. They'll have time to prepare for these teams that have to travel. Like there is an inherent disadvantage to being a North American team, and that is that you have to travel for these tournaments, and the APAC teams don't. And so the chances are much higher that APAC teams win these tournaments, in my opinion, for that reason, because they have a slight advantage, and they will be able to milk that advantage every bit. And it'll be something that we won't see. Well, I think it's something that we'll come up to see how it goes over time. But those are my thoughts. That's how I think this tournament's going to go. Like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Who you think's going to win, what you think's going to happen. I'd love to hear from you. But that's all from me. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. And I'm going to get out of here. So I hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.